Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Nonprofit Net Zoominar, Everyday Inclusive and Equitable Actions. I'm Dennis Boyer, a Nonprofit Net board member, and I welcome you to New England in February. I think you know what I'm talking about. We're having a nor'easter today, and I hope everyone stays safe. Our Zoominars are open to everyone without charge. And since we incur costs to bring them to you, we hope you'll consider supporting us with a contribution of, say, $10 to $20. We need your support to keep the Zoominars coming your way. So we will be sending you a link to our donation page. We'd also appreciate your feedback on today's Zoominar because it helps us plan future programs and it's important to our speakers. It only takes 1 minute to fill out that special questionnaire. So we want to encourage you to do it, and I thank you in advance. And now on to today's speaker, Joun. Sue is the principal of Diversity at Workplace Consulting Group, which works with organizations to diversify their workforce and create inclusive, equitable work environments. She previously served as the Vice President of Talent, Diversity, and Inclusion at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts. In addition to expertise in diversity, equity, and inclusion, she has had leadership roles in DEI and talent management in several organizations and industries. We do not have time to include the rest of her very impressive resume because we need to get to allowing Sue to bring to us the information that she has. With that said, Sue, welcome.
Answering all of your questions. Thank you. And spend the rest of the time answering your questions because we want to make sure that you get what you need from today's session, not just what I'm prepared to share with you. Does that format work for everyone? Great. So feel free to start putting your questions in the chat whenever, and Dora and Dennis will monitor them and ask them at the end of the talk. Okay, so let's dive right in with the content portion. The talk of today is going from concept to action with everyday inclusive and equitable action. And the reason why we keep saying the word action is because diversity, equity, and inclusion is one of those things where people believe, they talk about, but don't necessarily do. And we want to focus a lot about the doing part, because especially at this point of diversity, equity, and inclusion as a work stream, we really do need to be getting to the point where we are actually doing things and not just talking about it or being committed to it. And so let's start with the fact that many of you were nice enough to answer a question while you registered about what are some of the barriers you see in implementing diversity, equity, inclusion in nonprofits. And here's a rough summary of what we heard from you all. So you all told us when you registered that these were the most common barriers to diversity, equity, inclusion in the nonprofit organization. One was not quite sure where to start, but not quite sure where to go, where to start. Second was lack of knowledge, don't know what we don't know. Budget, financial constraints, and staff and resource constraints. The third thing we heard is change is slow. It's always been done this way, and progress and change is slow in our organization and in nonprofits in general. And then the fourth main thing that we heard repeatedly was, you know, our board, our donors, our senior leaders are not very diverse. So they may not know necessarily what are the best things to do for diversity, equity, inclusion. So that's what we heard from you all that are barriers. Here is, now I would love to share some insights of what we hear from nonprofits that we work with. So as you know, in our consultancy, we work with many different for-profit, nonprofit organizations. And here are the main things we hear from nonprofits. So in no particular order, here's what we hear most common. What we hear from staff of most nonprofits, or many of the nonprofits we work with, is the assumption that because we do such good work, we must be good with diversity, equity, inclusion. Because of the communities and the diversity of the communities we serve, we're good as an organization, without focusing a lot on the workforce itself within the organization. The second thing we often hear a lot about is there is wide commitment, wide belief, maybe even wide passion, but not enough actual action or change that happens. Maybe websites have been updated, maybe orientation, there's talk about diversity, but not enough actual action or change is happening. Also hear from nonprofits, especially from the staff, that founders and senior leaders in nonprofits themselves don't realize their own biases and microaggressions that they themselves are doing. For example, to be very blunt, one organization said to us, our founder is a feminist and thus doesn't think that she could possibly be racist. The other thing that we hear is organizations do not realize how much othering is actually happening within the organization and within the workforce. And when I say othering, meaning feeling like making people feel like they're different, difficult, not the same, may not understand, and not enough active work is done to make people feel like they belong in the organization. And othering could be lack of pronouns, lack of understanding of someone's culture, language barriers, lack of accent fluency, social economic background, different experiences. This feeling like if I don't see it, then it must just not be happening within our organization. We often hear it can't be happening here because I don't see it. And not enough recognition that just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. Okay, so that's a summary of what you told us when you registered as some of the barriers. I also just shared with you some of the things that we hear when we work with nonprofits about what are some of the barriers to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So with that all in mind, let me cover for you some thoughts around, without knowing your specific organization, giving you some thoughts. When in doubt, here are some things that organizations can do for diversity, equity, inclusion to combat these barriers. First thing is have goals for the year. Don't just say here's what we want to do for diversity inclusion forever. No, say, okay, what are the things in the year 2024 we want to work on as it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion? And I'm also here to tell you those goals has to include things that are beyond celebration of Heritage Months, that are beyond website updates, that are beyond awareness and education. So you may say, well, Sue, what are some of those examples that go beyond that? Here are some examples. Test and check, do you have pay equity across all levels and all regions? Do you have promotional equity across all areas, all regions, all offices, and all levels? Do you have turnover and attrition equity? In other words, is everyone leaving the organization voluntarily or involuntarily at the same rate? Check those things. And then if you don't have equity or if there is disparity, work to close that gap and fix that disparity. So take a look at pay equity across levels, across areas, across divisions. Are people getting promoted at the same rate for people of color and with your white Caucasian population, or across gender, or across age, or across different levels, etc., different abilities? So to the extent that you can, check to see, are there disparities in your organization and what are you going to do to fix that disparity? Second thing that you may want to consider doing, so first is have DEI goals specifically year over year. That goes beyond Heritage Month celebrations, website updates, education awareness. So what are the systemic things that you're doing within your organization, such as pay equity, policies, promotional equity, turnover equity, etc. That's one. Second thing that you may want to consider as a goal or things that you can do on an organization level is diversify your board and your senior leaders and your donors. And diversify in the most broadest sense across race, gender, social, economic experiences, etc. So some organizations have decided to increase their board size to allow for more demographics in, because some of the board members, the turnover wasn't happening very quickly to impact the diversity of their board. So they decided to add a few more board members. Some nonprofits have decided to invite clients and the communities that you serve to actually also be on the board. So if you are a food pantry, some food pantries have decided to take the clients or the end users of their food pantries and invite them to the board, for example. Senior leaders, if the turnover in your senior leadership is relatively low, some organizations have decided to be very strategic about taking the time to know who will be retiring or who will be leaving and planning years ahead of time to cultivate that next generation of talent from the inside as well as maybe from the outside. Because here's the thing, if you need to replace a senior leader tomorrow, chances are you're not going to be able to take the time and throw the widest net. So thinking year out, 2 years out about some of the roles that you may have to eventually replace and how do you make sure that you have the most diverse pool of talent as possible to recruit from. Same thing with donors. Great that you have donors. Well, are there other groups of donors that you could attract to your organization? If you get great donors from this particular city, because donors recommend other donors, right? And that tends to stay within the same network. So how can you throw the net wider to that donor pool? What are some organizations that you could work with to do that? Are there leadership organizations? Are there other associations? For example, there's an association for everything. There's an association for Black engineers. There's an association for Asian professionals. There's an association for women in sales. There's an association for, people in environment. There's an association for everything. So what are those places you can tap into to not only find potential board members, but also potential new donors? So those are some organizational wide things you can do. Have yearly goals for DEI that goes beyond celebrations and awareness. Take a look at your policies, practices, including disparities like pay, promotion, and turnover. And then third, diversify actively, work on diversifying your board, donors, and senior leadership. Plan for it, as opposed to just hoping that it'll happen. Okay. Yeah. Other things that you can do on an individual level, because we wanted to also include everyday inclusive things that you all on this call can do right away, as well as things that your organizations can implement. So here are some everyday inclusive practices to share with you. First one is sort of state of mind and maybe a mantra worth repeating. And in fact, I would say if all you do is at every interaction with your organization, every talk you give, whether it's diversity, equity, inclusion related or not, remember and continuously say these statements. What I see and feel at work may not be what others see and feel at work. So what Carrie sees on a day-to-day basis at work may not be what Sandy sees. Even if Sandy sits next to Joyce every day and does the same work, I guarantee you they're going to have different experiences. I have 2 boys, same house, same parents, 2 very different experiences. And then the other statement that you could follow up with that. So first one, what I feel and see at work may not be what others see and feel at work. And the second statement is, if there is injustice, inequity, systemic issues in society, we know that has to have seeped into our workforce and into our organization. It's a given. It's not a question of do they exist, it's a question of how are they showing up. If there are inequities and injustice in society, we have to assume that exists within our organization and within our workforce. It shouldn't be proven that it exists. It does. So, for example, some organizations say, we're not sure if we have a non-binary gender. We're not sure if we have employees that doesn't identify as non-binary for their gender. And I say, assume there is. We're not sure if we have people with different physical or invisible disabilities in our organization. Assume there is. Okay. We're not sure if people in our organization is facing racism. Assume there is. Sexism, genderism, ableism, ageism. Okay, you're all with me, it sounds like. I'm taking a look around the virtual space. It looks like you're all with me. Okay, so those two statements. And if you say those two statements, you don't have to say much more to show that you're committed and you want to hear. And that's also a great response to no matter what people say. So people say, you know what, I don't know if I believe in diversity, equity, inclusion. You say what you see and feel at work may not be what others see and feel at work. If someone says, well, I don't see anything happen, I don't see any of that here, I don't see any microaggressions happening in our organization, you say what you see and feel at work may not be what others. You see where I'm going? And if people say, you know what, look at the community we serve, look at, our senior leaders, we're all good people with good intentions. And you say, yes, but if we believe that there is injustice and inequities in society, we have to assume it has seeped in here. It's almost like a all-encompassing statements because they're true. Okay. The other everyday thing that you can do, and again, just I'm going general to narrow. Another one that you could just sort of keep in mind is, and what I'm about to say is a little controversial, so bear with me. The easiest way I can say it is the bluntest way I can say it, which is cater to the workforce. Don't cater to the personalities of senior leaders and board members. Cater to the needs of the workforce. Don't cater to the personalities and preferences of senior leaders and board members. I don't know how else to say it. So, for example, if your staff or a few members of your staff comes up to you and says, or shares that they're dealing with some biases or microaggressions, or they don't feel like they belong, or they wonder about something, the first thing isn't to worry about how are you going to share with the senior leader who doesn't deal with this information well. It's what do we do with these three people and how pervasive is it across the organization? I have to tell you, so many nonprofits we work with say we cater to the personality of the founder, or we cater to the personality of the board chair. We say things in the way they want it said. If we're worried that they're going to get upset, we don't say anything. We cater a lot to senior leaders and board members, as opposed to catering to the work staff. If there is any topic where we should cater to the workforce and not leaders, it's diversity, equity, inclusion by design. In fact, if we cater to senior leaders, everything will basically stay the same. Because I can't imagine senior leaders not changing if they knew something was already wrong, right? Okay. So the other thing, and again, I'm going broad and going to keep getting narrow into more tangible things. The third thing to think about is to believe and validate instead of debating. When someone shares with you their experience here, believe them. Very little reason for them to lie. Now, for someone to share with you an experience that's not positive at a nonprofit, they had to have tested for themselves if what they felt is real. They probably felt it multiple times. They're trying to figure out the best way to say it. Last thing they need from you all or us all is us not believing them. It's actually called gaslighting. So give you an example. Someone says, you know, as a woman, I'm constantly getting interrupted. And we say, are you sure? I don't see that here. I'm a woman and that doesn't happen to me. I mean, look at our senior leadership. We have lots of women. That's all gaslighting. That's invalidating someone's experience. So even if you've never felt it, you've never experienced it, you've never seen it, if someone is sharing their work experience with you, believe them. And here's the best way to show that. Thank you for sharing that with me. Say more. Thank you for sharing that with me. Say more. Notice, I'm not even saying you're agreeing with them. You're saying, thank you for sharing that with me. Please say more. Tell me more. End scene. Thank you for sharing that with me. I'm going to really go back and think about everything you just shared. And then go back and think about it. Remember, they don't have to have done it. They don't have to have shared it. They could have just kept talking about this among the, among the water cooler, virtually or in person. They're taking the chance to share it. Might as well believe them. Now, I'm going to go a little deeper here. This isn't the time for you to talk about how wonderful you are and how woke we are. This isn't the time. If Victoria comes to me and shares an experience with me, I shouldn't talk more than her. I shouldn't be like, well, Victoria, I just read this book and you're so right. No, Victoria, thank you for sharing. I would love to hear more. Listen actively. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to really go back and think about everything you just said. So don't gaslight and don't try to prove yourself because it's exhausting. You all with me? Okay, great. And then let's keep going deeper. Everyday inclusive actions. The other thing we recommend is to correct and not cancel. Here's what I mean. We've all put our foot in our mouths. We've all done something wrong or said something that doesn't sit well. So best thing to do is correct what was said or done. Let's not cancel the whole person. If Sandy find what I just said offensive, address what was said. Don't cancel all of me. Because also, if we create that culture where we cancel a person completely, that puts the fear of bringing anything up or the fear of saying the wrong thing, and it's the opposite of being inclusive. So correct what was said and done. Let's not cancel the whole person. So I'm just going to use a sort of an obvious example to illustrate that. It could be what Sue said didn't sit well with me. Not Sue doesn't sit well with me. What Sue said may be sexist versus Sue is sexist. You with me? Correct what was said and done, let's not cancel the whole person. All right, let's go a little deeper and a little bit more tactical. The other way that we could be inclusive every day is to have inclusive interactions, communications, and meetings. What do I mean by that? All right, interactive interactions, which includes meetings and so forth. So if you're having, rather you're having a one-on-one meeting or a staff meeting, create a format and say it out loud that this is what we're going to do. Which is things like we're going to do a round robin. So in the middle of the meeting, we're going to go around the whole virtual or meeting room and make sure that everyone has a chance to share their thoughts about this topic. Because here's the thing, if you're going to invite 10 people to the meeting, don't you want to hear from all 10? Because here's the other thing, you all, if there's 10 people at a meeting, 3 to 5 people do all the talking. And guess what? If one of those 3 or 5 people can't come, we reschedule the meeting. If some of the quieter ones can't come, we don't reschedule anything. Then why are we inviting these people? Right? So we're having meetings to get input, right? So Round robin usually works like this in staff meetings or decision meetings or project meetings or anything. Have a round robin in the middle of the meeting, because if you have it at the end, you'll run out of time. And at the beginning, it's too early. Have it at the middle. And here's how it works. We're going to go around this room or virtual room. And when your turn comes, in one sentence, share your thoughts about this topic. Notice I said one sentence because some of us will take paragraphs and we don't have time for that. And then let me just put a little bit more texture to that. When your turn comes, in one sentence, share your thoughts about this topic, or just say pass, no harm done, email the group later. Because some of us actually likes to think before we speak. Some of us, English is a second language. We need to process certain things before we speak. Some of us are introverts. Some of us, whatever it may be. Give everyone, so if you notice, we're giving everyone a chance to speak. We're not making people speak. And we're making it okay to communicate by other channels versus virtual. You all with me? Okay. This also works in one-on-one meetings. So let's say Joyce and I are having a meeting. In the middle, I could say, I just want to make sure I'm giving you time to speak. Joyce, anything you wanted to share? And just one of the best things we could do as leaders is to actually allow for silence. For us extroverts, 10 seconds of silence is like 10 minutes. For an introvert, 10 seconds of silence feels like 1 second. Space. Be okay with space and pause and silence. And then here are some other things about having inclusive interactions, including meetings. The words we use also matter. So if Sandy says something and I want to say something, instead of going, but Sandy, yes, however, Sandy, how about using the words yes and? Yes, I heard you, Sandy, and I want to add. Yes, I heard you, Sandy, and I want to add. Nothing. New England loves debates for some reason. Right? We don't like conflict, but we love debates. So instead of using words like yes, but, however, just say, yes, I heard you. You're not saying, yes, I agree with you. You're saying, yes, I heard you, and I want to add. Yes, and. Another set of vocabulary to use is the following. Sometimes in meetings, we say things like, does anyone disagree? Anyone? Am I wrong here? One of my supervisors used to always ask me that, Sue, am I wrong? And it always felt like a trick question. Am I wrong here? Does anyone, another one I hear a lot of is, does anyone have a problem with that? Those are all conflict driven. Maybe the intent is to get different opinions, but the way it's worded causes people to shut down. Because I always say, and I'm generalizing, in New England, we love to agree publicly, but disagree privately. Right? And so why not use these following words to get different opinions? Don't invite what seems like conflict, invite what seems like actual useful things. So instead of saying, am I wrong? Does anyone have a problem with this? Does anyone disagree? Consider using the words, we are actively seeking different perspectives. We are actively seeking different perspectives. What that does is it causes people to go, oh, you want my different perspectives. I'm going to be rewarded for that. And especially for people of difference, especially people who are not in higher roles, that kind of invitation feels less risky. Okay, let's keep going. Some other ways to have inclusive interactions is to be an amplifier. So here's what I mean. So let's say, I'm just gonna look at some names. Let's say Rebecca. I notice Rebecca constantly gets interrupted at staff meetings. By the way, excessive interruptions is a form of microaggression. or dismissing someone's idea is a form of bias. Saying things like, you're so new, you don't understand, constantly is an othering. Okay. So, oh, goodness, I just lost my train of thought. Oh, interruptions. So let's say I notice Rebecca constantly gets interrupted at meetings. What I may do the next time she gets interrupted is to say, actually, I believe Rebecca had something to say. Rebecca? Notice I'm not speaking for Rebecca. I'm not making Rebecca speak. I'm noticing she keeps getting interrupted or talked over, or the minute Rebecca talks, other people are talking. What I'm doing is amplifying her. I'm not even agreeing with her. I'm not even agreeing with her. I am making sure that she is heard. Same thing with emails. You know, Rebecca had a thought 3 emails ago. I just want to make sure that we read that. By the way, you could pre-plan this. We pre-plan everything else before an important meeting, right? If Pilar is constantly getting interrupted, she may pull me aside and say, Sue, next time we go to that meeting, if you notice me trying to speak and I'm getting interrupted, can you amplify me? Of course I can, Pilar. Amplify. And the reason why amplification is so important is it makes sure other voices are heard, but it's also low risk for you. No one's going to be like, can you believe Sue amplified Rebecca? Right? Relatively low risk. We could all do it. All right. Whew. So I believe, we're right around 1:30, 1:35. So that is the content that I have pre-planned, shared with you the barriers that you told us while you registered that prevent organizations from advancing DEI. I shared with you some of the most common barriers that we hear from our nonprofit organization clients, shared with you things that organizations can do, and shared with you some everyday things you could do right after this meeting today. Now, as we said before, we'd love to get your questions. I want you to get what you need out of this talk to advance DEI in your organization. So any questions you've always wanted to ask or comments, they're all welcome. Dora and/or Dennis, any questions in the chat function?
So I just want to make sure that Maria's question, Maria, if you want to ask the question yourself, otherwise I'll ask what you posted in the chat, which is what is the balance between managing a bigger board and achieving diversity? I just want to make sure that that question of yours was answered.
Okay, can you say that question one more time?
What is the balance between managing a bigger board and achieving diversity?
So I certainly wouldn't say go for, although I have seen nonprofits that have like a board of 50. So I've seen some large board sizes. So I would say make sure, well, it depends on your board, depends on the sophistication, it depends on the infrastructure and the support that's available for the board, all of that kind of thing. Of course, there's a lot of footnotes to that. But generally speaking, if you have 10 board members, maybe add 2 more spots. I'm not saying go from 10 to 20. Right? If you have 30 board members, maybe add, 3 or 5 more seats. So in other words, add a few more, not double size. So take a look at the diversity, look at the demographic of your current board, and then think about maybe getting approval to increase the size of your board, and then actively look to add to your board in terms of dimensions of diversity. And I would say add a few more seats. You're not looking to double. If for some reason getting it passed to add board seats is tricky, then maybe consider adding advisory boards or some task forces that report into your board, and or have your communities that you serve or clients that you serve come and speak to the board more often, and or actively then have a plan of if you can't increase the size and you can't get an advisory board and things like that, take a look at your board membership guidelines and figure out how can you actively anticipate board turnover, and what are the ways that you're going to be as diverse as you can in your pool of potential board members when board seats come up. And then here's the trick. All those inclusive everyday actions that I talked about also works on the board. I can't tell you how many board members say, I joined a board and I don't feel like I belong in that board. I can't get a word in edgewise, or they have it at a time that doesn't work for me. And as soon as they come in, they're either inactive or they're out. So you have to make sure that all board members also feel included, because you all know this, there's cliques within boards. I've seen boards where 5 people always hang out after and the other 10 barely, you know what I mean. It's not intentional, but there is. Or you have that one board member who talks for for about 40 minutes of the hour. You have to also look at that as well. Okay, I hope I answered that question. Other questions, Dora and or Denise?
So Emil asked, how does this work, which is catering to the workforce, when there is HR who is usually there to protect the organization slash manager slash leadership?
That, I think, is one of the greatest tragedies. Human resources by design, and it's not even human resource individuals' fault. Human resource by design is often there to protect the organization and senior leaders, not the staff and the workforce. I can't tell you how many individuals said to me, I went to HR and I'll never do that again. Now, so for those of you who are in places or positions of any influence, that is probably a great place to start and say HR should be protecting the workforce, cater to workforce just as much as we cater to senior leaders and the org's best interest. So that's one. The other part is, if for some reason HR is small, or there's only 1 or 2 people, or moving HR's mentality is a little tricky, whatever it may be, if you can't change HR, then I would say here are other things you can do. Create a DEI committee and gain some power from that. Okay, if you are going to create a DEI committee, though, you're not saying that DEI committee is responsible for all DEI as it relates to the organization. They don't deserve that burden. That may give it a specific role. So you can say, we're going to create a DEI committee to look at disparities in our organization. We're going to create a DEI committee to help us create DEI goals for this year. We're going to create a DEI committee that for the next 2 years is going to come to every senior leader meeting and have access to senior leadership. Figure out some way to give them visibility and power. Don't create a committee and then bury them. Then you're just wasting everyone's time and energy, and you just caused major demotivation. So creating committees, subcommittees related to DEI helps when HR isn't quite there yet. That's another tactic. The other one is, I chuckle a little bit because sometimes we focus all our energy on the 1 or 2 senior leaders that don't believe in DEI or don't want to do DEI. I say leave them be. Amplify and resource and give the mic to people who already believe in DEI. Let them drown out the rest. So if there are some senior leaders who believe in this and want to talk about this, or there are some individuals who believe talk about this, then give them the mic from whose voice is the loudest. Power also comes from whose voices are heard. Power also comes from who is amplified. Power comes from who is on the agenda, what topic is on meeting agendas. Power comes from many different ways. I hope I answered that question. Okay, other questions?
So Rebecca, I'd say I don't pronounce the last name. If you're here, you can answer your question. You can ask your question, or you're happy to read it. Oh, actually, she's, okay, Jenna, okay, I'm sorry, Rebecca just made a comment about the seminar. Jenna asked, I noticed that sometimes junior staff will respect the authority of male directors more than a female director, and I don't think they realize it's bias. How would I, as another director, start a conversation?
Many different ways. I would say, I don't know the whole context, but based on the question, so I'm going to answer the question as best as I can without knowing all the context. So if you notice that junior staff tends to respect the authority of male directors more, as opposed to female directors, I would say amplify female directors more if you can. So as another director, maybe if they're amplify the other female directors more. So for example, if Carrie is another female director, work to make sure whatever Carrie says gets amplified, not agreed with, but amplified, so that the power also comes from what Carrie as a female director is saying is heard more. So amplify other female directors. See if you could put in rules of engagement into place and say, you know what, we want to make sure at this meeting, we want to hear from everyone. So we're going to do a round robin at this meeting, which will cause some of the male directors not to have as much airtime. The other thing is also to come right out and say, you know, I went to this webinar with Sue Joun, and she talked about, you know, power dynamics and who gets heard and who doesn't. You know what I noticed in it is that we tend to maybe focus a little bit more on what the male directors are saying versus what the female directors are saying. Or maybe we give the male directors more benefit of that. I want to watch this and make sure that that's not the case. Let's check ourselves each time, shall we? That's another thing. And then the other one is get some male director allies. Say, listen, male director, I'm just going to look at some names. Male director Mark, Gregory, George. Say, you know what? I went to this session. I think this dynamic happens. I noticed that junior leaders are doing this way. Can I get you to amplify female voices more? Can I ask you to step back, or can I ask you to challenge the junior leaders to consider other people's ideas? So get some leader allyship as well. Okay, I hope that answered that question. Other questions? Great questions, by the way. I love it.
Okay, Ashley's asked how to navigate having a little budget for outside training, but no one on staff is comfortable enough to lead such sensitive topics in-house.
So a few thoughts. I believe there are workforce grants that you could apply for, so look into that to pay for training. The other thing is there are also nonprofits who are willing to pay for workforce training. So there are state government, like the Commonwealth, for example, I believe has grants to offer training. I believe the state also has grants for training. And I know that there are private nonprofits, such as yourself, that also has grants to pay for workforce training. So consider applying for some grants. I know this one community healthcare got $2 million of grant money to do DEI work over a period of 3 years. I'm just saying, there's some grant money out there for workforce training, so you could pay for that way. The other thing is take a look for some DEI trainers who often does pro bono work, for example. The third thing is maybe have someone from the outside partner with someone from the inside and do a training or a discussion together, and then pass the torch to someone from the inside, so that inside person not only has knowledge on how to do this, but also now has some credibility as well. And then if all of that doesn't quite work for your organization, or as you work towards that, one of the best ways to have DEI conversation isn't necessarily to have a DEI expert. is to maybe all watch a video together and then have a discussion about that. So for example, maybe you could watch TED Talk by Brian Stevenson, who will tell you that a Black person will get the death penalty 22 times more than a white person who committed murder. So watch videos like that and go, huh, do some of these disparities, do some racial disparities happen in our organization? And have a conversation about that. Read an article about how women are often interrupted at meetings and then have a discussion about that. Read an article about how to have more inclusive recruiting practices and have a discussion about that. So a joint reading of, notice I don't say books very often because it takes a long time to read a book and a lot of people don't read books and a lot of people can't come to the talk because they haven't read the book. So start with something small, like, I mean, literally book an hour and all of you watch the same video for 20 minutes and have a 40-minute discussion. Book an hour, all of you read a short article and have a discussion. So some other ways to think through that. Okay, more questions. I love these questions, please.
Oh, Kim has asked, for those of us who don't have a lot of influence over organization-wide goals, are there individual professional goals that are measurable and feel impactful to you beyond things like personal education?
Yes. And so I'm actually going to say this thing that I hope you all remember. As a whole, as a society, and in organizations, here's what we do. We often ask the oppressed to prove over and over again that they're oppressed, and then to fix that oppression themselves using a system that's not equitable. I'm going to say that again. We often ask the oppressed to prove over and over again that they're oppressed, and then to fix that oppression themselves using a system that's not equitable. And the reason why I say this is DEI cannot be a grassroots approach only. It also cannot be left to people of difference. It has to be system-wide. Having said that, each senior leader can own a goal, I hope, in their individual goals. It could be everything from a senior leader owning one of the DEI goals for the year or all 4 of the goals for the year. It could also be a middle people manager owning a goal for having inclusive meetings by having round robins at every staff meeting. Have a goal like that. It could be an HR professional having an individual goal that says that I will every year find 2 to 3 organizations that we could partner with to recruit from. It could be the administrative assistant who, or the executive director who sits on the board and say, in 2024, my individual goal is to have a plan on how to diversify our board membership. A frontline team member, their individual goal could be, I will amplify 5 colleagues every month in meetings. I'm making some of this, you know, just for ideas, but think about as everybody at this point, based on everything we said today, everyone in your organization could have a goal, to the frontline person, to the executive director, and everyone in between. And it could be everything from a middle manager say, I'm going to lead a conversation about DEI once every quarter. Oh, and by the way, self-educate doesn't count as a goal as far as I'm concerned at this point of our DEI journey. In the year 2024 and beyond, you saying I'm going to self-educate and I'm going to be more open and minded in your individual goal is not a goal. That's a given. That's ground zero. You don't get points for that. You only get negative if you haven't. We all have to self-educate. We all have to be open-minded. That's a given. That's not a performance goal. I need to know what you're going to do or change. Other goals. I'm sorry, other questions?
So Anita has asked, curious, at what point does one have to walk away from an organization or group because there's more of a culture issue? Is it more on a subjective basis / personal boundaries, or is there something more objective that acts like a red flag?
I would say you all individually have to decide for yourself. However, if your mental health and your emotional health is suffering, you got to go. Take your talent and go somewhere else. That organization needs to feel the pain of your departure. Especially with nonprofits, we so believe in the mission and the work, or the people that we love to work with, or the community we serve, we just stay. And that is not good for you or your team. Let me put, if you as a leader is feeling drained emotionally because of the work environment, you could only do so much as a leader yourself, which means your team members suffer, and so on and so on and so on. And so take care of your mental and emotional health. And if it feels like it's being taxed, you got to go. You got to go find another job. So I give you permission. I guarantee you'll find another role with another organization whose mission is just as meaningful. I promise. It may just take a little while. The other part is organizations. Don't believe for a second that if professionals of difference are leaving your organization at a rapid rate, it's not because of other opportunities alone. There's something about your work culture is not making them stay. So if you have people of difference, and I'll use the word difference, race, gender, education, ability, etc. If they're leaving at your organization very quickly, there is something in your organization that needs to change. Don't assume. Nonprofits love this. We're losing people because they make money somewhere else because we pay them so little. That's probably true, but also the number one reason people leave is because of not feeling like they belong, or they're getting what we call emotionally taxed, or their battery's so drained on invisible microaggressions, and that they just can't stay. So organizations, if you're losing people, yes, it may be pay, yes, it may be other opportunities, but you also know something's in your culture that you have to fix. Don't make people of difference have to do all the bending and fitting in. Because by the way, the opposite of belonging is fitting in. And as individuals, take care of your emotional mental health, pack your skills, pack your abilities, and reward another organization with it. Okay. Hate to sound harsh, but it's the truth. Okay. Other questions we could answer?
I'm just going to, Rebecca's been, Pardo's been patiently waiting to make a comment. So if you want to unmute, please go
Love to
ahead.
hear it.
Yes, I'm a human resources consultant, so you can see me like, yeah, to a lot of the things that you're saying. And yes, I am very encouraged to see more and more HR professionals align themselves with the goals of the organization. The metaphor that I use a lot is a bowling alley, that my goal, my job in HR is to help the organization hit the pins. The two gutters are your budget and legal compliance. Of course, we're going to stay inside those, but we're not aiming for the gutter. This is not our job to, legal compliance is not our goal. And I think DE&I is a place where, yes, that becomes very clear. I think also there's a view a lot of times that there's the interests of the employees and there's the interests of the organization, and we have to figure out how to balance them somehow. And what we need to do is figure out how to align them or recognize that they are aligned. And I think, you know, when you're talking about we need to hold on to a talented workforce, you know, how that's in the best interest of the organization. And how do you do that? By creating a workplace where people want to work and feel included, feel like they belong, feel like they're treated equitably, feel like they're treated like people. I can go on for hours, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Rebecca. 100% with everything you just said. And what you're saying kind of reminds me of another thing that we often hear. Nonprofits are famous for never terminating anyone. And so we often say, well, let's bring in a CDO or chief diversity officer. Let's bring in this new leader. Sometimes the best thing you can do for your culture is to exit someone. Not bring in someone, exit someone. Exiting someone is just as impactful. Who you keep is as important as who you bring in. And in fact, here's another thing I would say. Often for training, we often do training hoping to reach 1 or 2 senior leaders, and they're always the last one to get a message, no matter what training you do. And so I often say we spray the lawn over and over again, hoping to kill a few weeds. The weeds survive, the lawn dies. And so addressing that senior leader or addressing that one person who's been there a while, or addressing when the microaggressions or bias that they may be displaying, who you exit has just as much impact on your culture. Okay. Any other? Oh, we're out of time. Whew. First of all, thank you so much for all your questions and engagement. I love it. I am positive, based on the questions and the engagement, that you're going to make impact in your organization. And if there's one message, I hope you take away with this, which is you all have the power to do at least one thing in your organization as of 2 p.m. today. Back to you, Dennis.
Well, thank you, Sue. For those of you who joined us slightly late, I'm Dennis Boyer, emceeing and board member for Nonprofit Net. Sue, thank you so much. That was amazing. I could go on and on, I won't, but so impactful, it was beyond. So thank you. One quick reminder for our dear guests, we hope you'll consider supporting us with a suggested donation of $10 to $20, let's say. We need your support to keep these zoominars open free of charge to everyone. Next month, our presentation is going to be Public Relations Strategies for Nonprofit Professionals, presented by Dan Shortridge, the author of Do It Yourself Public Relations. That's on Tuesday, March 19th from 1 to 2 p.m. We look forward to seeing you then. Thanks for joining us, and so long for today.